tracking Lillian-on-the-Lake for a long time. But even in that process, just within the last week, just like every week that goes by, we learned something new. And for the longest time, we thought that the central building, that the main part of the building that you have a picture of when Miss Lillian first opened it, that was the house that was dilapidated and sat on the property. And then when the Jacksons bought it, I'll get into that further, but they expanded on it. So at the core of that building was one of the older houses in Hammonton, probably back to the 1850s or 60s. So, pretty much following a little bit along with what you have in your hands, but two of the most prominent families in Hammonton, back at the turn of the other century, were the Jacobs and the Jacksons. The Jacksons, we'll follow along the right way. The Jacobs came in the 1870s, and they came actually from Virginia, just like all the early settlers, came from the surrounding area. Many from New England, most from New England, but down to Virginia, New York State, Ohio, and such. They came, and shortly after they arrived, 8 years later, they had a daughter, and that was Carrie Lillian. First name Carrie, second name Lillian. Some people have the unfortunate circumstance of going by their middle name, and so did Lillian. So everybody called her Lillian. The Jacksons came actually earlier in the 1860s. They came from Maine, and Marcellus Jackson and Adelaide, and they had little Lester, or little Albert Lester, Albert L. They had him a year earlier, and they too were a very distinguished family. He started a very, very successful meat market with a Mr. Bowles, and that actually, for what it's worth, sat where the Sears building is today, right down there at 2nd and Bellevue. Then he bought out Mr. Bowles, and they did move across the street into the most used building probably in history, 202 Bellevue Avenue. That has seen so many businesses over the course of time. I've been tracking businesses since day one. I've got over 1,000 businesses for this town already, and that little building has really been used a lot. So Marcellus then was one of the founders of People's Bank, and he went on, and he was the original vice president of People's Bank. And then he ran and was elected mayor between 1908 and 1909. When the two families came together, the Jacksons and the Jacobs, it was really the meeting of two very, very, very prominent families. And in 1902, and Marcellus was still part of the family, the parents and the offspring. That, from what we know, they all moved together into the P.H. Brown house, which was a very large house that sits right now where the post office is. And together, the family, right at Peach and 3rd, and they then, Lillian had, she was very good at entertaining and cooking and everything else, so she decided to open up a restaurant, and that was called the Jackson House. And that was the place at that moment in time in the early part of the 20th century for banquets, Kiwanis meetings, all sorts of things, civic organizations like that. I have to presume wedding receptions and everything. They had croquet fields and everything else, going down. That whole wedge that the post office sits on, pretty much the exact same thing, went right down towards Vine, I guess it is, yeah. So she also, in that huge house, she started taking in boarders. And the boarders ranged, there were a lot of people that would come up to Hammonton in the summertime as they rented out their houses along Atlantic City area, Ocean City, whatever, just to get out of the madness for the summer months, and they would stay at Lillian's Jackson house. Also, a lot of, I've looked through the logs, the sign-in logs for the Jackson house, and names keep repeating, and I have to believe a lot of them were teachers, single teachers. That was very common back then, so they had needed a place to stay. So they also would come to the Jackson house. And then in 1918, we've all heard the story about Amitol that sprung up overnight, basically a city of 10,000 workers. And since they couldn't build the housing fast enough over there to get all cranked up, by July when they were in full production, a lot of them stayed in local residences, and the Jackson house was enlarged to take advantage of that opportunity, and a lot of workers stayed at the Jackson house also. They had two daughters. Unfortunately, one died when she was just a year old, which unfortunately was very, very common back in the day. The second daughter was Adelina, and she stayed with the family during the heyday of the Jackson house, and actually we'll find out later when the restaurant part of it was closed, she opened a dance studio. So she had a little thing going herself in that building. It started off very successfully, and but the 1920s were not a nice time. We all know about the Depression at the end of the decade, but the average person, the workers, whatever, they felt the pinch a whole lot sooner. The unemployment rate was crazy, and it got worse, obviously, as you got towards the Depression. But we've seen it. We saw it with Atlantic City Speedway also. The attendance dropped off a lot when you got past the center of the middle of that decade. And it was no different for the hospitality business and restaurant business. Again, looking through the logs of Jackson House, I could see from 25 to 26 to 1927, it just went down, down, down. So it was a struggle for them. And as they were struggling, Lillian also learned that White Horse Pike was going to come to pass. Up to that point, it was a whole bunch of dirt roads, some gravel, and mostly just individual townships going down. And actually, it didn't pass around the lake exactly where you see it now. It kind of went a little bit to the left. She heard that they were going to improve it. They were going to pave it in some fashion. And so she decided, well, when that happens, the main thoroughfare through Hammonton at that point was Egg Harbor Road, and knew that once the pike was put in, commerce and everything else would shift towards the pike. So she thought, okay, let's rebuild and kind of take advantage of that. So in 1919, she mortgaged against the Jackson house, and they bought. I always forget here. We've been cramming so much for this thing. It's like I wrote notes. I normally don't even need them, but Laura Gardner, she lived on a house across from the hospital, across the lake from a hospital. She was a widow, as far as we know, and she was going through tough times. So the house was very dilapidated, great property, and so they bought the Gardner house. And as I said before, the Gardner house actually sits within that structure that you see in the painting. It was kind of thought for a while that it was torn down, and then they built anew, but no. Deb came across an article just the other day in the library, and it was converted. And you'll see obviously see the similarities in the pictures. So she then started putting up billboards and everything, saying this is, will be the greatest restaurant in South Jersey here, and just like, and she, at first I think was going to call it Jackson on the Lake, but when it came to be finally in 1920, it was called Lillian-on-the-Lake. So maybe they were trying to distance themselves a little bit from the name. She continued to run both businesses, downtown and that, until 1928. And by then, things were getting really tough, so she closed up the restaurant business, kept the boarding part of it going, the dance studio took over, and she concentrated mostly on Lillian-on-the-Lake's operation. They struggled with that, and by 1930, there were 4 mortgages against Lillian-on-the-Lake, and there were 3 mortgages against the Jackson House, which at that point was now called the Jackson, as just a boarding place. So they were, we have seen invoices after bills, after bills, after bills, gone through every single one of them, and it was dire, to say the least. Okay, even Albert himself wrote a letter to the bank to say that he can't even afford to pay a $2 laundry bill or something, because they'd have nothing to spend. Okay, so it was a very sad ending. Or as we get to 1930, somehow through the bank they decided that they would lease out the building. She still owned it, but it was hoped that she could make money from leasing it out to independent operators, and that's what she did. And they cycled through more than one in the brief period between 1930 and 1933. In 1933, the James D. Carr, and I assume it goes to the real estate name today. Haven't checked that out, but if somebody has any information on that, I'd love to hear it. But anyways, it's not. Angela's saying no. Different car. Sorry, scratch that. Angela's always, yeah, walking encyclopedia, yeah. And thank goodness for that. And the other one's over there, Bill. So in 1933, Carrs bought it, and they had amazing plans for the place. They had tennis courts. They brought in 75 truckloads of sand, and they were going to build a half circle beach where it kind of curved around there, and enlarging the boathouse, all sorts of courts, for tennis and other sports. And we don't know how that all ended up, because I think it was a work in progress when all of a sudden the bank came in 1934 and foreclosed on the property, basically saying, we give up. We've tried to keep this thing going for the longest time, and we just can't take it anymore. So in the next 6 years, it sat vacant. Nobody came along until the Petkevis family. And this is where Ray's family it picks up on things. They bought it from the bank in 1940. They put all kinds of money fixing it up and adding on. There was some additions being made at that point, and had a very successful and the longest run of anybody. They did it for 21 years. It was the place in South. Everybody going to South Jersey at that point went right by the place, and it was definitely one of our biggest landmarks, certainly for the town of Hammonton. And it's kind of funny. His grandfather, Ray's grandfather, John, they were the ones who bought it with Grandma Mildred, for lack of a better word. I'm sorry. Anyways, as Deb was alluding to, Mildred ran it like with an iron fist. And one story that Ray has told me was when his mother, poor thing, she had met his dad, and they went into the restaurant, and because his dad was working in the restaurant whenever he was available, and I guess she was sitting on a bar stool or something, so she was being accused of being like a barfly, and so Mildred put her to work. And his mother never forgave Mildred because she stuck her in the coat room at Christmas. So it's like, it was probably mass mayhem trying to figure out whose scarf is whose and whatever. So that was always a bone of contention, if you will, between the generations. But it certainly was a family business, just like so many businesses here in town have been. Again, I'll let Ray elaborate. He told me at one point today, actually, that he graduated from St. Joe's, and they lived down just north of Egg Harbor City, town of Galloway, actually, but on North Frankfort. And his mother would drive him to school every day and back, and every trip was a history lesson, whether he liked it or not. Now, he soaked it up. His brothers did not, and to their, and sisters too, actually. Did they go to St. Joe's also, to everybody?
Just me.
Just you, okay. So yeah, he got a one-on-one history lesson. And so that's to our benefit here today. So they ran it until 1961, and again, I'll defer to Ray probably at this, as we go. After they sold it, now the sale of that's another bone of contention in the family. Mildred, first of all, Grandpa John passed away in 1961, so that undoubtedly.
51.
51? He was dead for 10 years?
Yes.
Oh, okay. He was dead for 10 years.
And it was actually right after 51, because my father was in the Air Force.
Yep.
In Korea, so it was like 52 or 53 is when he died.
Okay, I thought it was 61. That's good. All right, so she ran it alone.
Yeah.
And actually, when his dad was off fighting World War II,
My dad was Korea.
Yeah, Korea. Mm-hmm. Korea, they took away his liquor license because it was in his name, and they didn't know you're supposed to shut down on Election Day, and they took away his liquor license for 10 days. So he's off fighting the war and didn't know anything, that there was a problem. So anyways, after that, it became Mardan's. Dan Calderon was same as Dan's Stationery and all. Again, back to 202 Bellevue Ave. And so then, Mario Amendolia, excuse me. Oh my goodness. Really? That's how you pronounce it? Whew, little kid out of the Boston suburbs here. You can't handle that. Wow. And then Joseph and Ida Chaco came along, and they had the Blue Lake Inn, which is that was as we got into around 1970-ish. And then unfortunately the final chapter was Tony Cap's Restaurant and Bar. And that, from what everybody's been telling me, they had a lot of live music. They did a lot of that sort of thing. They kept blowing fuses and circuit breakers and everything for a while with all the extra demand on the electrical system. And ultimately, there was a fire in February of 1974. The pictures are over there, straight from the firehouse a couple days ago. And of unknown origin. And it's a darn shame because it didn't burn it to the ground, but it certainly destroyed it. There were 3 major fires, all very close together at about the same time. So no one will ever know what actually happened with.
Because the insurance premiums raised them.
Do you think? You think it was because of the insurance premiums were going up? Okay. No, yeah, we won't say any more on that. And but that's the story of the history, based pretty much what you have there too. So at this point, I guess, Ray, I'd like to have you come up and tell us how it looked from the family perspective. You weren't born yet, but you certainly heard about every single thing that went on. So, no further ado, Ray.
Keep me in the frame. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out today. This is really nice. This is more than I hoped for, but kind of what I was, more than I expected, but what I was hoping for. So thank you for coming out. Where do you start with this? And I think the appropriate place to start, it's kind of in the middle. So we're going to go from the middle, then we're going to go forward a little bit, then we're going to go way back, and then come. Does that sound good? All right. So November of 2023, my mom, Catherine Petkevis, who painted this painting, she passed away. After that, I bought the farmhouse that I grew up in, where this painting was, and hung for probably 50 years in Galloway Township. So this painting actually was in my bedroom as a kid. So imagine, being her age and having this I literally slept next to this painting for probably 15 years. And I'm gonna be honest and I'm gonna apologize. I damaged the painting over the years. Because as a kid, when you poke on an old oil canvas painting, it cracks. And to me, that was like bubble wrap. So I enjoyed pressing on the pen. You can see the little finger holes up there, the little round marks. So I've aged the painting past its time. But so that's my history with the paintings. I literally slept next to this for 15 years. So here I am as a father now, having bought the house I grew up in. And here's this painting. I've never stepped foot in this building. It burned down in 1974. I was born in 1977. But this is a piece of this town, right? And nobody in my family wanted it. And I'm rebuilding the house, and I'm like, what do I do with this? Which leads me to the Whites. So I called up the Hammonton Historic Society, and I initially spoke. I left a couple messages. Actually, and then he called me back, and it was like, as soon as we talked, it was like, can I come see the painting? And I was like, okay, I didn't expect that kind of response. And they got in the car and they drove down and they met me. And I jabbered on for a couple hours probably about the family and what was going on. And, the estate hadn't settled yet. So I couldn't do anything with the stuff in the house. So we just waited. We kind of hatched this thing, which is nice because during that time, it gave them a lot of time to do the research that we're hearing today. So then once that was all settled, they physically came to the house with their daughter and helped me take it down from the upstairs, carry it. I had to take kitchen cabinets off the wall to get it through the house because it's so big. We got it in a trailer and then we brought it here. And that brings us to today. So I'm going to tell you two things about this painting. Before I do that, I want to acknowledge my aunt, where's Ann? She is my father's younger brother's wife. And they had a house on Bellevue Avenue for the longest time, which ironically, I think you bought that after it caught on fire, right? Yep, and my uncle, everybody restored that house. A beautiful home out on Bellevue Avenue. So my uncle was a welder. He made this frame. There are two paintings like this in Hammonton. My mother painted them both, and they both have a similar frame. One is right here. The other one is in a house just across the lake, hanging on the wall of George Morley Jr., the son of former mayor George Morley Sr. So they couldn't make it today, but he told me, he goes, I got the other painting, it's on the other side of the lake. So both paintings have returned to the lake.
Is that other painting of the Lillian-on-the-Lake too?
They're different perspectives, but the same frame design, same size. My mother painted them both, and her husband and my uncle made both frames.
9 by 5? Yeah. We thought it was originally 4 by 8, but it's bigger. Yeah, the frame.
That was in the restaurant as well.
Both of the paintings were in the restaurant, in the ballrooms.
That's what you saw.
There we go. So this is why I love this event, right? Because it's Miss Joanna here. She was physically in the Lillian-on-the-Lake as a kid, running around hiding from my grandmother, trying to go upstairs. And she said she never made it upstairs because they actually lived upstairs.
Residents.
It was a residence. So my father grew up upstairs. So now I'm gonna tell you a little about, all right, is that good? Kind of went from there to there. All right, now we're gonna go right back to the beginning. So the Petkevis family, Lithuanians in Hammonton. When I see the name Petkevis in the United States, it's not like Hammonton, oh, maybe we're related. We are related. There is like one Petkevis family in the United, I swear to God, one. And we downrange from New Jersey to Florida to Alaska. We've dominated the entire country. And if you knew the men in the family, you'd understand why. So, my grandfather had 3 boys. They were born in Lithuania. He came over to America post World War I, somewhere before World War II, and he came over to start a life here. And he had a wife and 3 children. When he left Lithuania, he had a nanny. His wife became ill and passed away. So now he had 3 young boys and a nanny in Lithuania, and he came back and he married the nanny, my grandmother, who then came to America with him, and they had 4 more kids. So my grandfather, John Petkevis, had 7 children, 3 boys with his first wife, 4 children with his second wife, my grandmother, Mildred. To me, she's just grandma. But she ran that place. She ran everything. So they came over here. Then they had a small convenience store up in Burlington County, and they sold that. And then they bought a dairy farm in Pemberton. Here comes World War II. Fort Dix, military base, seized the land, seized the big buildings. They made, in the Italian, they made them an offer they couldn't refuse, but it was financial. They did really well. They made a lot of money on the dairy farm with a military check, and then they came and bought Lillian-on-the-Lake. So that's kind of the hopscotch pattern of how Lithuanians come to own this restaurant in Hammonton, New Jersey. What's interesting is, so now here comes my mom, right? Because I had the history lessons, like it or not, every day. 30 minutes to and from school. My mom told it, Aunt Roseanne, my mom told it like it was, all the time. She did not pull punches. She had an opinion, and she let you know exactly how she stood on everything. And so that's where kind of the colorful part of the story comes in. Mom and grandmom, well, let me go to that. So dad's the oldest son of Mildred. My father was a wild child. Rode a Harley Davidson to high school in Hammonton, class of 1951, Hammonton High. Marlon Brando. Uh-oh. What was your father's name? Edward. Edward Petkevis. That's the one.
We have 2 people that come in that thought they were going to see him today.
No, we lost him in 07. He would be like 92 today.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, they're 90, one of them's 93, right? And the lower. Yeah, I think they did.
Like I said, Petkevis is across the country. So I found his high school yearbook. My father was voted most handsome in his high school class, Hammonton High, 1951. Yep.
Because they keep saying how handsome you are.
Well, there's my boy. So there he is, running around Hammonton High, riding a motorcycle, the whole deal, right? Living here at the hot spot in town, And he was big. Let's face it, Hammonton is mostly Italian. Italians are not known for their height. So here's my father living here, and what he did for fun, because it was the only thing he was allowed to do, was swim in the lake and dive off the dam. So my mother said, you should have seen him. He had a body like Superman. She goes, and I saw him. He'd get up there on the dam and he'd pose. He'd wait till everybody was looking, and he would do these spectacular dives off the dam. You know, and it turns out to be true, because at his funeral, 2 people came to his funeral and said, your father saved my life. I was drowning in the lake. 2 different people. Yep. And, you know, I heard the rumors, oh yeah, Dad used to save people from drowning, and it was all true. Somewhere there's a front page newspaper story where my father had some Chippy, as my mother referred to her as, Chippy, on the back of his Harley, riding down Egg Harbor Road, and there used to be a Chrysler dealership, I believe. He apparently crashed that motorcycle with that young lady through the plate glass window on the back, and it was spectacular crash, front page news story, and they both got up and walked away from it. That's the kind of stuff my dad did. My grandfather got him a 1951 Chrysler convertible. The first year for the Hemi was his graduation present, which he totaled that on his way down to Texas, going to the Air Force for the Korean War. So when it comes to what Greg was referring to as, you know, the internal family stuff, when my grandfather died in 1952 or 53, my dad was in the Air Force during the Korean conflict, and my grandmother went to get him. We need him home. I got to run this business. So he was a bartender, and he did whatever he was told, but he wasn't really always happy about it, you know? He liked his motorcycles and this, that. So now here he meets my mom, who my grandmother referred to as our Irish barfly from Philly, because Grandma put everybody to work. Didn't matter who you were. If you came down there and you were associated with the family, oh, here, wash these pots. Here, do this. That's how she made the business work. If you were related, dated, whoever, you were working in that place. So one night she got stuck in a coat check, and oh boy, I mean, I heard that for 50 years. She stuck me in a coat check on Christmas Eve, you know. So, funny thing is, Grandma tried to put Mom to work some more. My mom said to her, I have a job. I work during the week. I will not work in your restaurant. And so she sat at the bar because my dad was the bartender. So there's the Irish barfly from Philly. But later in life, I remember, we always had a big old Cadillac, just like Grandma did. And we'd go to the casino. And Grandma, at that point, Grandma was 80 years old. Classic Lithuanian grandmother, the big honey bun, and she did the stockings and all the diamonds, and she'd take her hair out and brush it. It was like down to her butt. But every time I saw her, it was up in the bun, and she loved the casino, and I'd go out with them and sit in the back of the car, and, she'd give me $20 or whatever. So it was always fun to go out with Grandma. And that was like our big thing. Those are the memories I have of my grandmother, is going to the casino. And she lived with Aunt Ronnie, the youngest daughter, who married George Morley, the mayor, who became the mayor, who's also Buffalo Farms. So that's the Morley tie-in. Other thing, and I'm just kind of throw this out there, my 2 older half uncles, 2 of the 3 served in World War II. Their names are etched in a memorial in the center of town. One was in the Navy, one was in the Army. So, Jake, the Petkevis name is stitched all over this town now, bud. I'm doing my little part. I'm putting, we got our name up here. You got to keep that in mind. Someday you're going to have your turn. You got to stamp your name in the town somewhere, right? Ava, you too. If I get her to just start walking around the back of the room instead of across the front, I think that'd be a good start. Not now, sweetheart. So we're a family that's been here for a long, long time. this was that anchor point. When this picture came into my world, my control, this was the only obvious thing to do with it. I can't say thank you enough to the Whites for all your help. It's really been a fun adventure. I'm really excited to talk to some of you kind of offline here. I've already heard some really cool stories. I'm going to share a couple of them without diming anybody out, but well, let's talk about the fire, right? So after all right, I got two more things. So, Grandmom sold the restaurant after she'd run it for, Grandpa died like almost 10 years after on her own, right? And my other aunt, she did all the books, right? So she ran it. When it came time for Grandmom to retire, she sold the business. She didn't pass it down. Oh boy, did that not sit well with some of the other family members. She cashed it out. Did not sit well with my mom, because your father would have loved that. Yeah, well, Mom, Dad was crashing cars and motorcycles, and he wasn't exactly the reliable son. He was a wonderful father, great man. But during that time period, I don't think he'd established himself as, the rock that the foundation that you build a business on. So Grandmom cashed it out, and then after that, we know the ownership changes, and then we know it was burned down. Now the rumbling and the whispers in here, and I'm sure a lot of you are gonna know this. It was torched for the insurance. There is a truth. What's that? I didn't say it, but see, look, I listened to my mom. Some rich lawyer, and there a name just came out. So, who said that?
Angela, you're gonna get shot by
My mom would be so happy today. I'm stirring the pot still, years after she's dead, So apparent, and she used to say, yeah, no one could ever run that restaurant the way your grandmother did, because she didn't have a bunch of family slaves running around that she could put everybody to work. She goes, there's no way that anybody could make a profit in that business because they didn't have the family that she had. So, but obviously factors like the recession in the 70s and things like that. But so it's a real colorful story behind the scenes, just like every family has their colorful stories. But this one just happens to be stamped in a piece of dirt out there on the White Horse Pike as part of Hammonton's history. And as we can see from the photos and every prom and wedding and civic event and everything, this was the place to have it. And it just happened to happen while my family owned it. And I just got lucky enough, I guess, to inherit this painting and make sure that it came to a place where it'll forever be remembered, to be put on display. And for me, it's really nice that my mom is an artist. One of her works of art is on display with her name attached to it. And that's really what I'm excited about. And I'm excited to sit here and be able to tell this story in front of my kids and let them know that, their name means something somewhere. And I want to thank you today for coming out. And I really appreciate everything you guys have done. Thank you, Greg.
Standing across the road on one of the houses, I forget, there are like 3 houses across from the emergency room on the other side. And he was standing there. I didn't understand the significance. I had just moved in town, but now I do understand.
Did he have a can of gasoline?
There's an old saying my buddy says, the fish that don't open his mouth don't get caught. And it's probably the best thing that you'd ever told that story until today, huh?
I still have to be careful on my way out.
That's right.
I told my daughter, I said, Mark is born, and Lucy, his wife, was pretty tough. I said, Lucy's not alive to kill me.
And I think that's all the more reason, we're at a time now to kind of capture this and preserve, the folks that are still with us and still have the memories of this, and, so that it kind of can be passed on, in real stories like this, and not just something, although Greg's done a great job with the, the documenting of it. I think an event like this, where you breathe the life into it, with the actual folks that have been in the building and, had an event there, or, have an actual memory. It really makes it a lot more fun than.
So I put a picture over there, a couple pictures of a Joanne Penz's Sweet 16 birthday party that I was invited to. And I guess we must have been pretty good friends because we were at the head table, my friends and I. So they're over there, and the article from the Hammonton News is there, which gives our names, and which is in pretty rough condition for after all these years, because I don't store them like you store them. And also I remember as an old, kind of like when I was married, the auxiliary from the hospital used to have card parties there, and they'd set up card tables all around, and if you didn't play cards, you just talked to your friends or whatever and had lunch, and fashion shows at the same time, because we had a lot of dress stores in Hammonton at the time, so that was there. And then I don't think it was the Lillian, but I think it might have been Mardan's when they, somebody had a big New Year's Eve party, and I went with friends of ours, and that was really the only New Year's Eve party I think I ever went to, because usually we would have something at home, but it was a lot of fun. And so many weddings to people. I never went to a wedding there, but there were banquets and communion breakfasts. You'll see, I have pictures of the Holy Name, like all in front of the building. All these men was a Holy Name communion breakfast. I have 2 pictures like that from my grandfather's time. So there were just everything, because we really didn't have anything big in town until Kerrybrook opened. And so that's where people went.
Which across the street, Kerrybrook.
Yeah.
And my grandparents actually owned that land too, and they sold it, which later became Frog Rock.
Oh, okay.
So they owned both sides of the pike.
Yeah.
Oh, they
I
did.
want to show you something. I brought this from home.
That's
After my father passed away, we found a lot of cool stuff. I found his old album with his cars and his time in the Air Force. It was really cool. I found his yearbook. But we also found these. These are original whiskey bottles from the Lillian-on-the-Lake. It says Lillian-on-the-Lake Reserve, fine bottled whiskey, bottled expressly for John Petkevis, proprietor, White Horse Pike, Hammonton, New Jersey. We actually had an estate sale after my father passed. We had so much stuff. I mean, buildings and buildings. It was an old farm that he just filled with stuff. And somebody came over. They were like, "Hey, how much were these bottles?" I'd never seen them before in my life. And we sold, it was like a case of them. So I kept a couple, my sister kept a couple, and we actually sold a couple because the guy was like, "I have to have these." I'm like, a Hammonton historic. I wish I knew who it was. He might be here today. But he's like, "I'm a Hammonton history buff. Please let me buy a couple of these." So, but I took a couple. I had these hung in my bar, and they the bar on the stand. But I'm going to tell you a little secret here. My mom, according to her, right here where it says bottled expressly for John Petkevis, I think they were bottled expressly by John Petkevis. I'm pretty sure, because this was during Prohibition. That they owned the restaurant, right? Right during the time period. What was it, 1941? So Prohibition ended in 33. But I heard another story of somebody in town here who had a still in a bakery. Oh, there we go. There was a still in a bakery somewhere, and all the policemen would go over and get their bottles of booze. So it's kind of fun hearing these stories, but I understand that they were probably, they might have been in on that scene a little bit, especially when you have your own label, right?
How did it taste?
Rusty. Yeah, I wish. Yes, ma'am. No, it was an empty box. Just an empty box full of water. Yeah.
Very good.
Any other memories you want to?
Anybody? Yeah.
Miss Joanna here has some really cool stuff for you.
Well, I don't know how cool it is because it's not too safe to be too cool. So that being said, obviously, as a young child, I spent a lot of time there on the lake because, and I don't know how this happened, but somehow or another, my Uncle Carmen Presti met Amelia Petkevis, And eventually, from good friends, they went to Mr. and Mrs. So, look how elegant they were both. They really were really good. And your daughter, by the way, has Millie's face. I mean, that is a true picture, your daughter, of her face there.
What's funny is that's her aunt and uncle, and that's my aunt and uncle.
So we think we're related, we're not sure. But if you start giving names, we are not related at all. So that being said, bridal weddings were absolutely phenomenal. You have to realize in my time, which was a very long time ago, I'm not going to try to cover it up in any way, but in my time, there was no such thing as a babysitter. So if mom and dad got invited to an event, mom and dad brought you with them, whether you had 2 children in your family or you had 12, everybody went to the affair. Now we had rules, and the rules, I believe, were all established and made known by Mildred Petkevis. You want to bring your children, that's fine. That's the children's table. They are to sit there and they are not to move. And that's what you did. If they said no talking, there was no talking. It was kind of a Gestapo way of growing up, but of course it had its advantages. So there were so many weddings that we went to there because my father had a job with the county, and he knew a lot of people, and he was always getting invited to weddings and all that other business. So my Uncle Carmen came from a family of 9 children, and the first one passed away at 6 months. The other 8, 5 of the 8 were boys, and 3 were girls. All 3 of the girls worked in Kessler's clothing, so they were tailors during the day, but they all had jobs at night. They all worked 2 jobs from way back when. This is not a new adventure today where you go, well, they have to hold 2 jobs. That's not that. It goes back a long time. Some people were holding 3 jobs in order to survive. But when Aunt Millie and Uncle Carmen got married, he was the youngest, by the way, in the Presti family. They had this phenomenal wedding. And Mildred, Mrs. Petkevis, she was the most detailed person that I ever met, especially as a young person. But I absorbed everything. I was not allowed to discuss it. There were rules. So the Aunt Millie is the oldest daughter, and the youngest one was Veronica, with the nickname of Ronnie. She's married with more elite, by the way. So Mrs. Petkevis, or Mildred, had the little flower girl's gown as an exact replica of the bride's. And this little guy here is my brother, and he was a year younger than Ronnie. I don't know if that makes a difference, but it did with him. So when they got married in the church, and then from the church, they were on their way to this magnificent restaurant called the Lillian-on-the-Lake. And everybody thought, by the way, that it was named after Aunt Millie, because her name was Lillian. And they all had, by the way, I did some searching on that. All these women, the Petkevis women, all had a middle initial of L. So I don't know if they were all Lillians or Loises or whatever they may be, but they all seem to have that. And by the way, I found another site in which the entire Petkevis family, there is a social security number listed after every single one of their names. Ooh. You talk about fraud. All right, so here's my brother.
And they voted in the last election.
So here's my brother being an itchy little boy. Somehow or another managed to get his hand caught in the car door and did a really bad job on it, with all the gory stuff. And so from the church, instead of going directly to the lake for the reception, they go to the hospital because he has to have his hand sutured. And there's his tuxedo, his little tuxedo. You can see he's got this very shocked look on his face because he's 4 years old. What does he know? And he is purposely holding his hand with the bandages behind Ronnie, because the photographer kept saying, "Don't let those bandages show. We can't have that." The wedding pictures are wedding pictures, and you can never redo them. So this is the little guy here, and Aunt Millie. This magnificent cake, which was made by Chick Matola. They had Ideal Bakery at that time. And get a load of these candles. This entire building was absolutely spectacular, and it was more or less one humongous room, but it had its divisions. And I remember coming through that front door, and when that door opened it to see the foyer of that building. And right where that foyer was, there was the coat room, and there was a restroom, and then there was a brown door that led stairs up to their residence, because as someone mentioned here, that's where they lived. And I was very curious, of course. I still am. Something gets in your blood, it never gets out. And so I always wanted to see what their house looked like upstairs, because I've never heard of anybody living upstairs. So I would creep. Now, the younger people, the cousins, they would follow me because I was known as the instigator. And I'd go up the steps very quietly. There was no carpeting on the floor. And so you always heard the pitter-patter of little feet of us monstrous children. I'd get almost to the top, but I could never get that other door open quick enough to see what was going on up there. I didn't know. And lo and behold, there would be Mildred at the foot of the steps. She'd go. She didn't have to say a word. Oh my God, we were like rugrats. We would just run down those steps, run past her, and go over to the lake. There was a boathouse here that was literally falling apart. How we ever survived playing in that boathouse, I will never know. But we did laundry things. Kids today also do laundry things, but they do it in a more vicious fashion. We would take the oars from the rowboats and throw them into the water. What do they need this for? We throw them into the water. When the chef would leave the kitchen for whatever reason, because he was planning the big event of the night, we would get into the kitchen to get food to eat, to have a little picnic on the back there, which is now Rocky Colasoda's place. That's where we used to have our little picnics from the lake there. We had more ways of figuring things out. Now, why did I go to the lake so often? Yes, Carmen's my uncle, but Mrs. Petkevis, when she had a big event and she needed extra help, she'd call my mother, because my mother was sharper than a tack when it came to food, and my mother would go there and help her. So Mom is working with Mildred, and they're doing their own thing, and we kids are just, as I said, we were like little rugrats. We were running all over the place, getting into trouble, constantly into trouble. So with that, with the wedding picture is, of course, we had every family affair. You would not even if there were more than one restaurant, you would never consider going to any place else because you were committing a mortal sin. So that being said, there was a bandstand. As you walked in, you look straight ahead, you saw the foyer where Aunt Millie sat at that desk from morning till night and did the books. We would scatter right around her, and she just like we never even existed. She just was very involved business-wise. So in front of that bandstand, and if some of you who attended at fairs there, Jerry Vitalo's band played for every event imaginable. And the men, for whatever reason, there's many of these pictures of men from these, whatever party it might be. It could be a wedding, etc. This happens to be the Presti guys. My grandfather, Gaetano, he gave this is Rita Scaffidi's wedding, Aunt Millie's wedding. So my grandfather, he stood for giving her away. No, that was Rita Scaffidi's wedding. But at any rate, we got the 5 sons here, all dressed up in their finest wear. And then we also had every event imaginable. So this is, my grandmother and grandfather had their 50th wedding anniversary dinner there. And this was in 1953. In this picture, you will see Mrs. Petkevis with some gentleman. I don't know who he was, but whatever.
Ed Malakas.
Yeah, and then another lady, but they all have that same Lithuanian face. You just can't get away with anything else. That was it. And so here's Aunt Millie and Uncle Carmen and their child, who at the time, who is passed, by the way, but we always called her Poochie. She was cute. She was, little chunky and everything else. So she was Poochie. So this was a family affair. All family affair. It was committing a mortal sin if you thought of having it in a house or in another place. And so here is Uncle Carmen, the youngest son, and he was at this engagement party of Carmen and Amelia, which would be Aunt Millie. So that was in the middle 1940s, I believe. So this is the family there. These people were all very hard workers. 3 out of the 5 were farmers. And the 3 women, as I said, worked in the clothing industry. There, then comes along Rita Scafidi, who marries, she was the oldest cousin, I'm the second one. I don't know, but it makes me nervous, because Rita has since passed. At any rate, there, Mildred's dining room was for, you had to be special to get into that dining room. When he talks about her, you walked the straight line, you did more than walk the straight line. She just had to stomp her foot, or look at you, or go like this. She never really had to say a word. And by the way, she made the best Polish raviolis with that white sauce. Now you get all these Sicilians that go to these events, and when they eat pasta, they want red gravy. And Mildred would have them serve as a first course these monstrous pierogies. Yeah, pierogies. But they call them white raviolis, and they put white sauce on them. And here would be the Italian guys.
Joanna, I think these people are just
They
about
had
had
it.
enough.
They had it.
But thank
Yeah,
you very
anyway,
much.
there's a lot of stories, and I have to be careful because sometimes then I slip into something I shouldn't say. But that being said, it is what it is. Yeah, I know that. And listen, we thank the Historical Society, by the way, and the Canoe Club, and everyone else who played a role in making this event happen today. I'm thanking you for everybody here.
Thank you. There is tons of food over there and tinfoil. Please grab some sandwiches, wrap them up, take them home, okay? Anybody, feel free, grab anything. Thank you.